Yeah, boy. You see what it is? Your boy Stingray Cool here back. First, read Matthew chapter 12, Luke chapter 1, and Mark chapter 9, and Ephesians chapter 7. But yeah, man, jazz is a very important force to the world. Don't let them fool you, because jazz influenced a lot of rap. Next to G-Funk era, of course, but jazz influenced a lot of rap and a lot of good things. A lot of important music and influences. I think, Nas, see who else? I think Jay-Z to us was influenced by some rap. By some jazz, doggone. Goody Mob, I would say. I feel like a little bit Outkast. Outkast had some jazz influence. I think Super Flair, Catalytic, Funky Music had some jazz influence. I want to say Criminal had a little bit of jazz. I know Criminal had a little bit of jazz influence. Yeah, Stankonia didn't really had jazz influence, but I think to Criminal, Supercalifragilistic music, funky music, and what's the Criminal, whatever the other album. It was another album that had jazz influence, but I remember them too. But when I went to Stankonia, it wasn't really no. Stankonia had jazz influence too. Had to remember that. And see who else had some jazzy like influence. Then let's see who else. But jazz is so influential. What up? Yeah, only reason I grown because I'm shorts, man. I think in less than 1 week, I might doggone subscribers just grown through them shorts, man. Cause it ain't my videos getting views, but them shorts getting the most views. I'm not even like I'm doing the video. It's something about them YouTube shorts. They like it, I guess. Like I got some miss. I ain't gonna lie, but I got some hits too. Yeah, I'm about to come to Kick one day. But yeah, man. Them YouTube shorts, man, they saving my YouTube career. Next to the hip hop, of course. Cause I'm not really doing skits. I just do my reactions to other people's stuff. And somehow reason they seem to like it, especially the ones who like them knives and stuff they show. But yeah, man, jazz. See who else has some jazz influence? Oh yeah, Kendrick got some jazz influence. J. Cole got the jazz influence. This Khalifa to a extent, he might have a jazz influence every now and again. Bone Thugs every now and again, in their later years had the jazz influence. And Tyler Creator, this is like later stuff. Some of that had some jazz influence too. But the power of jazz is like everywhere. Yeah, man, them YouTube shorts help grow my video, my subscribers. It's like overnight, just something told me to like God told me just do these YouTube shorts, and man, my subscribers are growing. Every now and again, I ain't gonna lie to y'all. The subscribers go down, then I pop back up. I don't know if it's subscribers or YouTube. Like it could be, I ain't want to jinx it. Plus, it could be 200 and pop back down to 199, then pop back up. I don't know if it's subscribers or YouTube, whichever one, but you know, it's the channel growing, man. Them shorts, I didn't realize there was. I got like shorts that got like maybe one view, 539 views, 538 views, 537 views, and I got some that got 1,000 views. But yeah, we getting there, man. 299. Let me see. We about to read the history of jazz, man. Jazz is a music genre that originated in the African American communities of New Orleans, Louisiana in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, with its roots in blues and ragtime. Since the 1920s, jazz age has been recognized as a major form of musical expression in traditional and popular music. Jazz is characterized by swing and blue notes, complex chords, call and response vocals, polyrhythms, and improvisation. Jazz has roots in European harmony and African rhythmic rituals. As jazz spreads around the world, it drew on a national, regional, and local musical cultures, which gave the rise to different styles. New Orleans jazz began in the early 1910s, combining early brass band marches, French quadrilles, buquins, ragtime, and blues with the collective polydynamic preservation. But jazz did not begin as a single musical tradition in New Orleans or elsewhere. In the 1930s, arranged dance originated swing, big bands, Kansas City jazz, a hard swingy, bluesy, improvisational style, and gypsy jazz, a style that emphasized musicity, Bartes, where the prominent styles of bebop, immersion, and Latin Ninja Turtles. Quick, Bebop the Warhawk was named after jazz and rock study. The Rhino was named after Jamaican music. Had to throw that in there right quick. But emerged in the 1940s, shifting jazz from danceable popular music towards a more challenging musician's musical, which was played at faster tempos and used more chord-based improvisation. Cool jazz developed near the end of 1940s, introducing calmer, smoother sounds and long, linear, melodic lines. The mid 1950s saw the emergence of hard bop, which introduced influences from rhythm and blues, gospel, and blues to small groups, in particular to saxophone and piano. Model jazz developed in the late 1950s using a mode of musical scale as the basis of the musical structure of the improvisation, as did free jazz, which explored playing without regular meter, beat, and formal structures. Jazz rock fusion appeared in the late 1960s and early 1970s, combining jazz improvisation with rock music's rhythms, electric instruments, and highly amplified stage sounds in the early 1980s. A commercial form of jazz fusion called smooth jazz became successful, garnering significant radio airplay. Other styles and genres abound in the 21st century, such as Latin and Afro-Cuban jazz. Oh, this is a lot of info. I'm gonna have to make part one and part two. Oh, the in mythology in definition. The origin of the word jazz has resulted in a considerable research, and its history is well documented. It's believed to be related to jasm. If you're curious how to spell JSM, a slang term dating back to 1860, meaning pep energy. The earliest written record of the word is in 1912 article on the Los Angeles Times, in which a minor league baseball pitcher described the pitch which he called a jazz ball because it wobbles to simple, can't do anything with it. The use of the word in the musical context was documented as early as 1915 in the Chicago Daily Tribune. Its first use of the word in a musical content was documented in the early 1950s. Oh, here we go. Document using musical context. New Orleans was in November 14th, 1916. Times Picarni article about documented and used in musical context in the New Orleans was in the November 14th, 1916 Times Picarni article about jazz bands, but they spelled it with an S instead of AZ, instead of ZZ, instead of AZZ, basically. In the interview, the National Public Radio musical U.B. Blake offered his recollections of the slang connotations of the term, saying, when Broadway picked up they called it jazz, which now is like pronounced the typical way we see now, Jazz. It wasn't called it. It was a slang composition of the term. Oh, here we go. It was spelled jazz, JASS. That was dirty, and it was. And if you knew what it was, you wouldn't say it in front of the ladies. The American Dialectic Society named it the word of 20th century. Now we going on when it was spelled typical jazz, JZZ. So basically, they felt like it was inappropriate to put the SS on it. Basically, they felt like it was inappropriate to put the ASS on it. So they didn't want no ASS jazz. So they rephrased it to AZZ jazz. It's difficult to define because of the encompasses of the wide range of musical spanning a period of over 100 years. From ragtime to rock-infused fusion, attempts have been made to define jazz from the perspective of other musical traditions, such as European musical history or African music. But critic Joaquin Ernest Burnett argues that its terms of reference and its definition should be broader. Definition of jazz is as a form of art music, which is originated in the European music, and the jazz has a special relationship to time defined as swing. Jazz involves a spontaneity and vitality of musical production, in which improvise plays a role and contains a sonority of manner of phrasing, which a mirror of individuality of the performing jazz music. A broader definition that encompasses different areas of jazz has been proposed by Travis Jackson. It's a music that includes qualities such as swing, improvisation, group interaction, developing an individual voice, and being open to the different musical possibilities. Green Gilbert argued that jazz is a construct which designates a number of music and with enough in common to be understood as part of the coherent tradition of Duke Ellington. One of jazz's most famous figures said, it's all music. And the elements, one of my favorite part right here, this right here, this right here, this right here, that kind of like improvisation. Main article jazz improvisation. Although jazz is considered difficult to define in part because it contains many subgenres, improvisation is one of the definition elements. The centrality of improvisation is attributed to the influence of earlier forms of music, such as blues, a form of folk music, which arose in part from the work songs and field hollers of African American slaves on plantations. These work songs were commonly structured around a repetitive call and response pattern, but early blues was also improvisational classical music performance and is evaluated more by its fidelity to the musical score. Turn this down here. With less attention given to the interpretation or ornamentation and accompaniment, the classical performer's goal is to play the composition as it was written. In contrast, jazz is often characterized by the product of interaction and collaboration, placing less value on the contribution of the composer. If there was one more on the performer, A jazz performer interprets a tune in individual ways, never playing the same composition twice depending on the performer's mood, experience, and interaction with band members or audience members. The performer may change melodies, harmonies, and time signatures. In the early Dixieland, aka New Orleans, aka A K A A period K period A period. So I had to throw a little rap in there. New Orleans jazz performers took turns playing melodies and improvisation, counter melodies in the swing era of the 1920s to 1940s. Big bands relied more on arrangements, which were written to or learned by ear and memorized. So let's see. Improvising within these arrangements in the bebop era of 1940s, big bands gave way to small groups in minimal arrangements in which the melody was stated briefly as forms of jazz. A socialist is supposed to be by rhythm section, one of the more cordial instrumentals, piano, guitar, double bass, and drums. The rhythm section plays chords and rhymes that outline the competition structure and the complexity of the socialist. In avant-garde and free jazz, the separation of socialist and band is reduced, and there is license or even a requirement for the abandon of chords, scales, and meters. In the words of what my man said, the chords, strings, we bring melodies. G Funk, where rhythm is life and life is rhythm. My man Warren G said that. Man, as I read this, it's starting to make sense. The G Funk era. All right, see. In the early Dixieland, oh, yeah. Performers took turns playing melodies and improvising counter melodies. In the swing era of the 1920s, 1940s, big bands relied on more on arrangements, which were written on learned by ear, memorized. Socialists improvising within these arrangements. In the bebop era of 1940s, big bands gave way to small groups and minimal arrangements in which the melody was stated briefly at the beginning of most of the piece was improvised. Model jazz abandoned chord progressions to allow musicians to improvise even more in many forms of jazz. A socialist is supported by a rhythm section of one or more cordial instruments. Piano, guitar, double bass, and drums. The rhythm section plays chords and rhythms that outline the composition structure and complement the socialist. In avant-garde and free jazz, the separation of socialists and bands is reduced, and there's license or even requirements for the abandoned chords, scales, and meters. All right, here we go. Traditionalism. Since the emergence of bebop, forms of jazz that are commercially oriented and influenced by popular music have been criticized. According to Bruce Johnson, there has always been a tension between jazz as commercial music and an art form. Regarding the Dixieland jazz revival of the 1940s, black musicians rejected it as being shallow nostalgia entertainment for white audiences. On the other hand, traditional jazz enthusiasts have dismissed bebop, free jazz, and jazz fusion as forms of debasement and betrayal. An alternative view is that jazz can absorb and transform diverse musical styles. So I can believe that. By avoiding the creation of norms, jazz allows avant-garde styles to emerge. Oh yeah, about to hit some of my favorite parts right here. Diversity in jazz, jazz and race. For some African Americans, jazz has drawn attention to African American contribution to culture and history. For others, jazz is remembered as an oppressive and racist society and restrictions on their uh, artistic visions. Amari Baraka argues that there is a white jazz genre that expresses whiteness. White jazz musicians appeared in the Midwest and in other areas throughout the U.S. Papa Jack Lane, who ran the Reliance Band in New Orleans in the 1910s, was called the father of white jazz. The original Dixieland Jazz Band, whose members were white, were the first jazz group to record at Bix Beiderbecke, was one of the most prominent jazz socialists in the 1920s. The Chicago style was developed by white musicians such as Eddie Condon, Bud Freeman, Jimmy Partland, and Dave Tuff. Others from Chicago, such as Benny Goodman and Gene Krupa, became leading members of swing during the 1930s. Many bands, including both black and white musicians, these musicians helped change the attitudes towards race in the U.S. I like that one. That was one of my favorite ones to read, and this is my second favorite, Rose of Women. My third favorite, Jews and Jazz. Gonna be cool. Roles of women. Female jazz performers and composers have contributed to jazz throughout its history. I'll do Betty Carter, Ella Fitzgerald. I love Ella Fitzgerald. I love Betty Carter too. I love Adana Hall. I love Billie Holiday. It's one of my favorites. Peggy Lee is good. I love Peggy Lee. Avi Lincoln is good. Anita Day is good. Denny Washington is good. And Adele Waters is good too. Well recognized by their vocals talents. Less familiar were band leaders, composers, and instrumentalists such as pianists playing instruments in jazz in the early 1920s, drawing particular recognition on piano. When male jazz musicians were drafted during World War II, many all-female bands replaced them. The international sweethearts of rhythm, rhyme, I meant to say. No, it was rhythm, which was founded in 1937, was a popular band that became the first all-female integrated band in the U.S. and the first to travel the USO, touring Europe in 1940. Five women were members of the big bands Woody Herman and Gerald Wilson. Beginning in the 1950s, many women jazz instrumentalists were prominent, some sustaining long careers. Some of the most distinctive improvisers, composers, and band leaders in the jazz have been women. Trombonist Melba Listen is acknowledged as the first female horn player to work in major bands and make a real impact on jazz, not only as a musician, but also as a respected composer and arranger, particularly through her collaboration with Randy Watson. After this Jews and Jazz, I'm going to chat with y'all and state my opinions because this is a lot of information. Might have to make a part two of this on dollar signs with Randy Weston from the 1950s and 1990s into the 1990s. I meant to say Jews and Jazz. Main arc of Jews and Jazz. Jewish Americans played a significant role in jazz. As jazz spread, it developed to encompass many different cultures. In the work of Jewish composers and Tin Pan Alley helped shape the many different sounds that jazz came to incorporate. Jewish Americans was able to thrive in jazz because of the probationary whiteness that they were allotted at the time. George Bornstein wrote that African Americans were sympathetic to the plight of the Jews American and vice versa. As disenfranchised minorities themselves, Jewish composers of popular music saw themselves as natural allies with African Americans. The jazz singer with Al Johnson is on one example of how Jewish Americans were able to bring jazz music that African Americans developed into popular culture. Benny Goodman was a vital Jewish American to progression of jazz. Rest in peace, Al Johnson. There's a picture of him in 1929. All right, here we go. Goodman was the leader of the racially integrated band named King of Swing. His jazz concert in the Carnegie Hall, let me say Carnegie Hall. Yes, Carnegie Hall, my bad. In the 1938 was the first ever to be played there. The concert was described by Bruce Eder as the single most important jazz or popular music concert in history. My bad, y'all was reading this information. Now I'm back. Cause that's a lot of information to read. I might have to make a part two of this. Thank you, Young Doug. I had to look at that stuff on Wikipedia, so I wasn't annoying y'all. I just had to go ahead and get the Wikipedia stuff read. But yeah, man, but jazz, I didn't realize this. I knew about jazz, but not like that. Let me take this phone away from the mic. But yeah, man, that's a beautiful thing. Like the Jewish jazz. I'm gonna check out some of that. I know some of the well, I already know the female jazz I mentioned. They got good music. They before my time, but they OG legends. Of course, I know about the male jazz. I know about BB King. You know, he a legend all around. Even I think he had stuff in the '90s. How powerful he is. I put him with that with like, even though these two singers I'm about to mention are different genres, I put him up there with Little Richard and Michael Jackson. You know, Little Richard, the king of rock and roll, and Michael Jackson, the king of pop. How they managed to evolve and go into the early 90s from the 50s. They went from the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, and even the early 2000s, and still have it. But I know for a fact, since we talk about jazz, from jazz, like BB King really managed to stay in all genres all the way till he passed on. I don't like to say death. But yeah, jazz is a powerful force, and all the elements I read, how they all combine for something unique. It's like Voltron. They all came together for a unique, cool, a good genre. And you can still see it in well, I ain't gonna say modern hip hop unless like they underground. But you see in a lot of old school hip hop, even like Nas from I Rule the World. I say the Who World is this. Uchi Walla Walla had some. I say Uchi Walla Walla one of them. So I know you had it in. And Nas for sure. Then you got Mac. Yeah, 90 feet. The group that did 93 to Infinity. You hear a lot of jazz elements in that. De La Soul had a lot of jazz elements in that. Tribe Called Quest definitely had a lot of jazz elements in that. It's come from a big Tribe Called Quest fan. The Fugees had a lot of jazz element, but they had some African and Haitian element and Jamaican elements too in their music. But I know jazz was definitely a big part of that. To an extent, you can hear a little bit in early '90s Salt Pepper songs. I ain't gonna say all of them, but some. At least to me now, these my opinions. I ain't saying I'm 100% correct, but this is how I feel. Then you got like, man, I don't know. Can I say Kanye West? I don't know. Every now and again in the early 2000s, I did hear some Kanye West songs that sound like they had some jazzy elements too. But we could say I'll say Kanye too because he had some of the elements. Kanye's just a genius. He had so many different elements. I ain't gonna lie to you. That's what I like about it. You can't make a mind with a song you like from Kanye. That makes you doing things. Common, I know he has some jazz elements. Erica Badu has some jazz elements. Jill Scott has some jazz elements. India Reed had like she has some jazz elements. I meant to say, but she had a little bit of African neo soul elements too. I said my boy Music Soul Child, he got that jazz elements in his songs. And as far as like, I think Tito Jackson, he recently added like more jazz like elements. And jazz is so powerful, man. They reached everyone from different colors, races, and genders, from the whites to the blacks to the Jews to the females. But yeah, man, I think Eric Sam EP indeed add a little bit of that jazz element too. Man, I think so many doggone early '80s rappers was more influenced by jazz than I would say the '90s. Cause no, we was that later '80s the gangster rap came in, so the elements was gonna change. It's just nothing against gangster rap or any elements. I'm just explaining. But yeah, man, but I can remember that. I'm not even an '80s baby, but I can remember just being a student studying history. How like a lot of the '80s stuff was like very highly influenced by jazz. Oh yeah, Wale. I can't forget Wale. He one of the ones in the new generation had some jazz type beats. Now again, Drake had them jazz style beats because his dad risen from Memphis before met his mother in Canada and made it and had him. So Memphis got that jazz style beat, and I could tell like through hearing like Drake's dad talk, he's very highly influenced by jazz. You can even tell by his dress because some of the OGs and the jazz era always had like the suit and tie and them fancy hats with the white band around them. Sometimes the fella and his dad dressed and looked like a jazz person. Kind of looked at his interview. He looked like he cut him. He bleed jazz. His mama, I don't know what music. I forgot what this is. His mama was like mainly listening to, but without even knowing Drake's dad, me being in the South, I could tell he's highly influenced by jazz, and he was a jazz musician without them even saying it. It's just how you could tell. That's a look of jazz. They all had their precise looks, like BB King, Big Mama Thump, if I ain't mistaken, that's what it's called, and so many others. But yeah, man, jazz is just a powerful force, man. I love it. I love the Afrocentric beats. That's a good element. The jazz, Jamaican style beats, the reggaeton beats. I love that too. But if you like, as I did this research, like I said, I'm gonna have to make a part two because there's a lot of information. Hold up, let me go see first. Yeah, I'm gonna make a part two of this because there's so much information. So part two is on the way soon. Might be today, might be tomorrow. But just the power and influence of jazz and all that is powerful. So I'm about to end this part one, and part two coming soon. If I do my research more, it might be a part three. So we out. Peace, love, and God bless. Some come on the light. But yeah, man. Shout out to Philly. Rep your team, baby. Philadelphia Eagles, baby. Philly all day. Remember, like, share, and subscribe. You get the cash up, that's how sing with Cool Sport channel. But most importantly, let's get them views up and get some more of my shorts coming soon. We out. In the words Snoop Dogg, yay, yay. In the words E40, what are my realizations? In the words MC8, straight up menace. In the words Spice One, straight general. Peace, love, God bless, love y'all. Remember John 3:16, God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, that who believe in him, so not perish, but have everlasting life.